Hey guys, I've been cooped up here inside the house for quite a while now because we are in the middle of winter. We do live in a state that has the 4 seasons, and this year it's been especially cold. We're currently experiencing this Arctic blast from the north, which is bringing in record historic low temperatures in this region and in other regions of the US. I think it is a season of introspection and contemplation, thinking about life choices, thinking about ways to optimize your life to be more efficient, especially in January when people make their New Year's resolutions. But I do feel like the winter especially is a season of letting go, reevaluating, learning about what's working, what's not working, and then strategizing ways that you can optimize, be more productive, or maybe level up in your life, your career, whatever you want for the rest of the year. And during this time of introspection, I have been thinking a lot about living in this house, about the comfort, what it's brought us in terms of benefits, the shelter. I do recognize that it is a privilege and a luxury, and I've gained quite a bit of knowledge about the process of buying real estate here in the US and in France. And I want to give you guys that overview today about what to know, the differences, people involved, financials, getting a loan, going through the banks and other options, making an offer, and locking down a contract or an agreement between buyer and seller. We'll also discuss who can actually buy if you're a French person here in the US. Can you buy property if you're an American in France? We'll talk about that. And also the interest rate mechanics that define long-term costs. So the first part is finding the property. Of course, you need to know what location, what type of property that you want. Here in the US, we use websites like Zillow. When you do find that property, you're going to contact the real estate agent, and then this will prompt that real estate agent to reach out to you, ask you questions about what you're looking for, what your criteria are, your non-negotiables, your negotiables. Check if you have any questions about that property. If you are really interested, they may also schedule a viewing with you. And normally here in the US, you'll work with one real estate agent. So if you want to look at 10 different properties in your area, you would probably use the same real estate agent, and they will do all of the viewings with you. You can find like a list of properties, they'll go ahead and schedule it, and then you can get all of those viewings done in one weekend, just depending on their schedule. In France, this process is a little more slow paced. It's different in terms of the length of time that it comes to finding the property, contacting the realtor, and then viewing the real estate properties. A major difference that I have observed here in the US, when properties go to market, typically no one is living in that property or in that home or apartment, and you can schedule your viewings very quickly because no one is living there. But in France, I have observed that it's not really that common to go to a property that's completely empty. It's actually quite common to visit properties that are still inhabited by the homeowner or by tenants until the sale is made. The first thing that happens generally here in the US before you make an offer is you purchase an inspection report. As a buyer, you need to independently go out and find a home inspector company that costs usually around $500. Here in the US, this process is generally optional. That seller could have multiple offers, and a lot of people forego inspections completely because they want to get into properties quickly. They want to win the bid. This is really bad practice because you could be going into a deal without knowing the material defects of a property. And in France, conversely, I think a lot of things are regulated in France a lot more than the US, which is a great thing because the inspection report is required by law. The seller has to provide that inspection report. It's called a dossier de diagnostic technique, and this report details things like electric, plumbing conditions, the condition of the foundation, the roof. They also give disclosures about asbestos, lead paint. Sometimes they include the septic system condition. In many of these homes in France, they can identify known defects because they are older. And in the US, if you do purchase a home that is older and you get into not requiring an inspection because you want to get your offer won by the seller, this can create a lot of problems down the road for the buyers, especially if it is a big ticket item like the roof or the foundation is not good, or if there's electric or plumbing problems, that can also create a lot of problems down the road. Getting an inspection report is always a good idea. I'd love to hear your guys' perspective. Leave your comments in the chat below. So let's talk about the process once an offer is made on a property. Typically in the US, this process is a lot more quick and competitive. And in France, this process can take a lot longer, sometimes months, and it's a lot more deliberate and regulated. So in the US, once an offer is made, the real estate agent would then write up an agreement contract. If you have the purchase agreement ready, you would then make an earnest money deposit. The main difference is that here in the US, the buyers have their own real estate agent and the seller has their own real estate agent. In France, it is a lot more regulated. The real estate agent works on behalf of both buyer and seller. And something to note is that once offers are made, they cannot go over asking price in France. This is a major difference because even if there are multiple offers made on a property and it is a highly competitive market, going over asking price is actually illegal. But just because it's illegal doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Once an offer is made, the purchase agreement would then be made, which is a contract between buyer and seller. It is the same here in the US and in France. A major difference is how the transactions are handled. They are handled quite differently. Because here in the US, the process of closing does go through a title company. Normally you have the title company, the escrow agents, real estate attorney, and other people that are involved in handling the closing of the mortgage. Here in the US, there are a lot of people and a lot of moving parts when it comes to closing. And because there are so many people involved in the transactions, this process can go by really quickly, typically between 30 and 45 days to close on a property. Now let's chat about the difference. In France, everything goes through a notaire, which is a person that handles the title transactions, they handle the taxes, they write up the contracts, and this process can take several weeks to months. Typically, it can take around 3 months for the notaire to write up all of the documents and contracts and clear the title. So essentially, here in the US, there are multiple people for each individualized or specialized aspect, and in France, there is the notaire that handles everything. They verify that the home or the property can basically close. The notaire ensures legal security, and so this process can take several weeks to months. The next big thing is financing. Here in the US, financing can be either straightforward or creative. It really just depends on your situation. Getting a mortgage can actually be a little easier than getting a mortgage in France. There are a lot more accessible loans depending on your situation. There are conventional loans, USDA loans, which is for rural areas. There's also VA loans, which are for veterans, and there's FHA loans. Whereas in France, typically people go through conventional loan options with banks. They are a lot more conservative. It is a lot more difficult to get a loan approved than it is here in the US. Banks are more stringent. They have a lot more criteria that must be met. They often prioritize those with long-term work contracts or CDIs, and they're also not really lenient when it comes to working with people with short-term work contracts, even if it gets renewed every year. So please keep in mind that if you are a freelance worker or if you have money in the bank and you're able to afford a home in France, they still may not accept your loan. Something else to note is that typically for French residents, the deposit required is anywhere between 10 and 15%, and for non-residents, this is usually 20 to 30%. Also, the fees for the notaire are anywhere between 7 to 8% of the purchase price. However, this is often on a sliding scale, so more realistically, it can start anywhere between 1 to 2% of the purchase price. Typically, banks in France also enforce a strict debt-to-income ratio between 33 to 35%. In the US, they're a lot more lenient and they do take a look at people's overall profile. They don't just look at your debt-to-income ratio. This can largely depend on the type of loan that you get. And they're more interested in learning where your debt goes and if it's good debt or bad debt. In France, most loan terms are between 15 to 25 years. And in the US, most loan terms are between 15 to 30 years. These terms create a big difference in the long-term costs of owning property here in the US and in France. One of the major aspects that impact the long-term costs of owning property is interest. Here in the US and in France, we similarly use the amortized interest mortgages. Homeowners pay interest on the remaining balance of the loan at the beginning of the year, not on the original purchase price. So the first half of the loan period, you're normally paying more interest than principal on the home. And on the second half of the loan period, most of the monthly costs will go towards the principal balance of the loan. Historically, interest rates in France are lower than in the US, hovering anywhere between 3 to 4% for the 15 to 25-year mortgage period. And in the US, this fluctuates a lot, but currently the mortgage rate sits around 5.9 to 6.1% for conventional loans for 30-year fixed interest mortgage. Both the US and French real estate property markets are typically open to foreign buyers. However, if you're a French resident interested in buying property in the US, please keep in mind that every state has their own requirements and regulations. So you will need to take a look and see where you're interested in buying and look at their specific regulations. Also, keep in mind that purchasing, living, or investing in property here in the US does not grant residency or citizenship. And if you are a US resident interested in buying property in France, please just note that the process there is much slower, more cautious, and less accessible than in the US, typically requiring more upfront costs, more money in the bank, and more verification. Neither system is perfect, they just represent a different priority. I'd love to hear what you guys think about buying property here in the US and in France. Have you ever considered it? Are you a French resident interested in buying property in the US or vice versa? Are you an American interested in purchasing property in France? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Bye!